All right, so like I said, I want to make sure that I have a video for you guys. So here's your bell ringer for today. Yesterday we started the Napoleonic Age, and really Napoleon, France after this reign of terror. So after the Directory, Napoleon rises to power through the coup d'état, right? What we talked about yesterday. And real quick, here's your bell ringer. I'll give you a few minutes here. You can just pause the video, write down your response, and I'll just go over it. So now's your time. Just pause it, write down your bell ringer. I will be grading these tomorrow, so make sure that you have them. All right. So yesterday we talked about Napoleon. Okay, we mentioned about how he rose to power in France. A lot of the reasons because the Reign of Terror brought on a lot of chaos and anarchy in France. And they're also fighting wars, conflicts with Austria, Prussia, Great Britain, and it was unstable. It was really there was no structure for France. So Napoleon realized, well, the only way to try to lead this great military, this great land army, and defeat these external forces is by taking power himself. So he utilized his military background, his backing, his popularity, his experience to gain a footing and launch this coup d'etat. And we talked about this term yesterday, which just means the overthrow of the current government, which was the Directory. So Napoleon, like we mentioned yesterday, rose to power, takes over really government because of his fame, his popularity, his experience on the battlefield, and he brings on change in France. Like I said, France had the strongest land army. It was just a matter of who was directing it, who was leading them, and what better person than Napoleon. So with that, now as Napoleon is leading, okay, he ruled in a different manner than what we saw of Louis the 16th. Okay, I know what you're thinking. How is a dictator different than an absolute monarch? Well, with Napoleon, he brought on the Napoleonic Code, which we talked about yesterday. And this was a system, set of laws, and freedoms, rights for the people that the revolution was fought over. Okay, so in other words, this was a constitution that was given to the people, one that was going to bring change, okay, provide liberties and freedoms for the people that have really never been seen before in France, and provide structure and stability France needed to overcome these wars with Austria, Prussia, and Great Britain. So overall, with Napoleon, he brought on a lot of change. One thing we noted too is that he brought back the Catholic Church to France. We mentioned with the Reign of Terror with Robespierre, they eliminated the Catholic Church because it was a sign of this old monarchy, this old system of control that's been around for literally 1,000 years. So with Napoleon, well, he's bringing back the Catholic Church because he realizes the church, religion, is a good system of structure and it brings stability back to the people. But at the same time, he wanted to make sure that his power is above what the Catholic Church was during this medieval time, during this feudal system. So he is really infusing that he is and showing, expressing that he is the power above the Catholic Church. So it was symbolized by him taking the crown literally from the Pope, who is going to crown him Emperor of France. Okay, as the Pope was coming over the crown, he grabs it straight from his hands and places it on top of his head, showing and symbolizing that he is the power above the church and that this old system would never return. So again, if you look at Napoleon, it's one of those things where was he a villain? Was he a hero? Well, you can kind of take your pick either way. But he did bring on a lot of change in France, providing these freedoms, these liberties that were fought over for the revolution, and at the same time, ruling in a manner that brought stability back to France, which we'll talk a little bit about today with these wars. So there you go. There's Napoleon in a nutshell. And like I said, we mentioned yesterday about his height, how it was more just propaganda based off from Great Britain to try to demoralize France, to try to really build some sort of confidence for the British soldiers. In all reality, he was average height. Okay, he wasn't really too short, to be honest. So we also talked about his upbringing, how he was from a noble family. He grew up. He was born on the island of Corsica, right off the coast of Italy. Okay, and he gained a strong military background and experience through his time with the military camp and military schooling that his parents provided for him. All right, so that's where we left off yesterday with Napoleon. Here's your terms for today. Bring them up for you. So we'll start here with bureaucracy, let's say, the continental system, peninsular war, guerrilla warfare, and nationalism. So I'll give you time to write those terms down. You can just pause the video, research the terms, and write them down. So, like I said, I want to try to have a test next week. The goal is to have it either Tuesday of Wednesday or Wednesday, right before break. Okay, I will have a study guide out for you, hopefully tomorrow. That's the goal. And then you can work on that over the weekend and have it ready to go for Monday. We'll have a review, obviously, before the exam. All right, so give you a little bit of time for that. So, bureaucracy, it just means that this is a government that there is no elected officials. These are people that are in lifetime, lifelong government positions. Okay, in all reality, it's whenever they resign or let's say they die, they give up this position in government. And with Napoleon, he brought on a bureaucracy to France after the fall of the Directory. And this bureaucracy, okay, is formed to have control, have stability within the government, okay, and a lot of critiques about a bureaucracy because, again, these aren't elected officials. Okay, even today, the United States has a form of bureaucracy where some of these people are chosen to lead the country through tough times. One example is the Department of Public Health. Okay. And that's a good example of a bureaucracy and how some of these officials are just chosen off their merit, off their accolades. And again, some people have an issue with it because it's one of those things where these people aren't elected into office. So that's what a bureaucracy is. And it's just important to note as Napoleon is taking power in France, he's issuing a lot of these government positions to many people that aren't elected. And that obviously isn't a representative form of government. But one thing to know about Napoleon, he did provide liberties and freedoms to people and even a sense of education, which the next term I'll say is okay, this is a secondary school for people of France. And Napoleon realized that the only way to try to have a strong future in France is if the citizenry is educated, mainly with military strategies and techniques. So, again, that's a term you'll see a little bit here in the presentation. Okay. And again, with Napoleon, he realized that education is essential. The continental system is really just a system how France tried to strangle Great Britain. We know that Great Britain is an island and they are really reliant on the resources and materials coming in. So great way to try to defeat an opposition is just cut off those resources coming in. So he set up this system where many countries that were allied with France and countries that really were maybe on the same side, just an alliance with France. They could not trade with Great Britain. And with his continental system, again, he was just trying to choke off Great Britain, try to really crush them financially, which was a smart move. But ultimately, this kind of led to his downfall as this really this blockade of Great Britain of any type of ships and shipments coming in with materials and resources from other lands would be shut off. So it costs a lot of money to do that, right? And with that, again, the oceans are pretty big. So it's one of those things without radar, even. Okay, it's hard to really strangle your opposition in these early years and in the early 1800s. And it's really difficult to do. So with this blockade, again, with Great Britain, they're still known as the strongest naval force. So this was almost a backfire for Napoleon. But in any case, it was a smart move. The Peninsular War. So this was a war with Spain. As Spain broke off from this continental system, they actually depended on Great Britain for a lot of resources and materials. And you really can't blame these countries, right? They're dependent on these resources and materials. And when it comes to higher prices and inflation, you want to make sure that you don't have a rebellion yourself. So a lot of these countries kind of broke off from this continental system and actually traded with Great Britain. And the need for these resources were just paramount over France's alliance. So Russia will do the same thing, and this will push Napoleon to wage war all throughout Europe, which we'll talk more about tomorrow. Guerrilla warfare is just this non-traditional style of warfare where it's more hit and run strikes, band of fighters that are utilizing the terrain to their advantage. And they're striking the enemy in, again, non traditional ways. So they're utilizing cover, utilizing their environment to their advantage with targeting an enemy. And finally, nationalism. We talked a little bit about that yesterday. And nationalism is just extreme national pride within your own country. This is what emerges after the Napoleonic Wars. And this is going to prompt and push for World War I, which will happen just shortly, just short of 100 years later, which we're going to be mentioning here soon. So there are your terms for today. So real quick, let's go to the presentation. All right, so we finished with Napoleon with that prestigious look here in this portrait. And again, just symbolizing his power over France at the time. Again, he wanted to make sure that he was above the Catholic Church. He was over this old system of rule of power. And he actually strips the crown right from the Pope's hands and places it on top of his head, and symbolizing that he is this power above the Catholic Church. But again, he wanted to make sure that the church was still there in France as it provided a system of structure and stability for the people and really good moral ethics. So this is going to provide a good system to keeping the citizenry under control, so to speak. All right, one thing to note here too with his divorce, right? This is something that I thought was interesting and something to add, as he divorced his wife and he stated that it was because she couldn't provide him a male heir to the throne. And that's one of the biggest reasons. But another reason was because, well, he saw this as another political move. Well, he thought that if he married the Princess of Austria, chances are he could really have an alliance with a strong force in Europe and to try to lead a stronger force and a stronger war against Great Britain and Prussia, defeating these powers that were opposing him for so long during the Revolution. So with that, he kind of uses this marriage with Marie Louise as a means of gaining a foothold in Europe and gaining an advantage as seeking out a new alliance just by marrying into the family. And it works out. It works out. So we'll talk more about these Napoleonic Wars and how this alliance with Austria really benefits him moving forward. But anyway, I wanted to make sure I noted about this divorce, just because it led to an alliance to form for Napoleon, obviously for France, with these Napoleonic Wars. All right, so his accomplishments here. So built the largest European empire since Rome. So he conquers Europe, which I'll show more of a picture here soon enough, and we'll talk more about it tomorrow. He also sold the Louisiana Territory to the United States. So this overseas possession in the New World. We talked quite a bit about the French and Indian War and how France and England were duking it out over supremacy in the Western Hemisphere. And now he's just giving up the land. And the reason for it is because he thought, well, what better way to try to pay off some of the costs of the war and try to bring down inflation within France, just selling some of these territories that, well, at one time provided a lot of materials and resources, but at the same time, he had to pay for these costly wars. So rather than raising taxes like we saw during Louis XVI's rule and putting the people in France through hardships, he thought, well, the best way to do that is pay for it in a different way. Let's just sell off some of these territories, which the United States will pick up. So Thomas Jefferson will buy the Louisiana Purchase from Napoleon from France, which will double the size of the United States' territory in the Midwest of the United States. He also set up a fair tax code, which, again, one of the biggest issues for the French Revolution was the inequality of taxes and the inequality of wealth. He also hires government officials based on merit, so they had to have some sort of backing, has had some sort of really accolades to their merit when it comes to appointing them government offices. So that's one thing to note, different than Louis XVI, as he was just kind of appointing friends and people of the nobility and higher status. This is giving opportunity for people to strive to become a stronger suit or a higher class themselves. Also, like I mentioned with the vocab terms, he created public schools all throughout France. The reason for it, you need to have a strong future. And the only way you're going to have a strong future is if you have an educated citizenry and have the youth prepared for maybe warfare, prepared for maybe finding the new innovations that will propel the country in the right direction. He also, like I mentioned, restored Catholicism in France. So again, this was somewhat of the old system, but at the same time, he wasn't going to allow the corrupt Catholic Church to take over. He showed his rule, his power over the Catholic Church by taking the crown from the Pope and symbolizing he is the emperor, the leader moving forward. So, Catholicism, religion, which we talked about, is a strong structure in society. It's needed to provide stability to families, to people, and a whole country. So, it's very beneficial. And then creates a Napoleonic Code. So, it provides liberties and freedoms that the people really never had under Louis XVI. And especially during this reign of terror, the people needed these freedoms, hence the revolution, right? So he's going to provide these freedoms, these liberties to the people, providing an education, allowing them to have to express their religion. Okay, this established religion, Catholicism, but still, this was a move in the right direction. Freedom of speech, okay, having the ability to speak freely, except if it's against Napoleon, right? So there was some sort of control there. One thing to note too about the Napoleonic Code is that it brought on slavery and some of the overseas territories that France acquired. So that's one downfall of it. And it also took rights and liberties away, and just really women were treated unequal compared to men. All right, so here's Napoleon's empire. As you can see, he pretty much conquers all of Europe. And that's through alliances with other countries, and that's through just really taking this land from all the other areas. And the idea, again, with the Napoleonic Wars, which we'll talk more about tomorrow, is that he's trying to eliminate this old system, this absolute monarchy, eliminate feudalism, which kind of goes along with the Napoleonic codes. Okay, eliminate serfdom, this really this form of slavery that was going on during this feudal system for thousands of years throughout Europe, and really try to limit the power of the Catholic Church still that was reigning within Central Europe and Eastern Europe. So we'll mention more about Napoleon's expansion here soon enough. Last thing I want to mention here is with nationalism. So with Napoleon, his conquests and his push for liberties and freedoms all throughout Europe, this builds a sense of nationalism within these countries all throughout Central and Eastern Europe and all throughout Europe, to a point where it's going to increase national pride for one's country, patriotism, in other words. And with that, that's going to push countries to form bitter rivalries with one another. And ultimately, that's going to be one of the causes to World War One. So make sure you remember nationalism. That's not going to go away. That's going to be something talked about here in the future, especially when we get closer to World War One. So stemming from Napoleon, well, nationalism arises, and that's why many people view him as a villain, so to speak, because he brings a sense of nationalism to Europe, which is only going to heat things up and intensify rivalries in Europe leading up to World War One. All right, so we're going to talk about Napoleon's three big mistakes more tomorrow. So, with the continental system, we'll talk about this blockade of Great Britain, try to eliminate their trade with other European countries. The Peninsular War with Spain, as Spain breaks this continental system, starts trading with Great Britain, because let's face it, Great Britain was the strongest power at the time. A lot of countries were depending on its trade, its resources coming in and out. So, rather than taking an economic hit, Spain decided to trade with Great Britain. And ultimately, that ticked off Napoleon to a point where he wanted to start a war. And eventually, we'll talk about the invasion of Russia. So we'll mention it more in the future here, especially this invasion of Russia. It's very difficult to do, it's hard to manage. A lot of it because of logistics, because mapping. And when it comes to the terrain, it's very difficult to travel throughout these tough environments throughout Russia. Okay, it's really not developed. It's not like they have roads developed like you'll see quite a bit within Central Europe and in Western Europe. Also, the cold weather, the environment. That's going to halt many armies, not just Napoleon's, but 100 years later when we talk about Hitler, same thing. Okay, it's just a brutal environment. It's very tough to try to invade a country, especially with winters that reach temperatures below negative 20 degrees. All right, so we'll talk more about that tomorrow. So with that, make sure you guys have your bell ringer done. And at the same time, make sure that you have them accounted for. Current events, don't forget tomorrow. Okay, we'll have our current events ready to go. So we will see you guys later. One last thing here. Well, whatever.